Welcome back, folks. I'm Ronald.
And I'm Ronnie.
And this is the Ron's World. Thank you so much to our subscribers, and if you haven't subscribed yet, please do down below. We talk about the topics that no one really cares about, but they always have a strong opinion about it. This week, we're talking about the manual transmission. Should people really learn how to drive a manual transmission? Ronnie, what do you think?
Of course they should learn how to drive a manual transmission. You have so much more control over the car when you drive a manual, and it is just absolutely the safest and purest way to drive a car.
I don't understand the logic behind any of that, because nowadays an automatic transmission allows you to keep both hands on the steering wheel, which everybody knows is the safest way to drive a car.
Yeah, but if you get into bad weather, say it's rain or snow or anything else, having that manual transmission allows you to really control the car by having it at the right gear, as opposed to an automatic, which is just, well, whenever it decides to shift, frankly.
Well, Ronnie, if you're driving in an old-timey car, that might be true, and maybe that's the kind of car you want to drive perfectly fine. But if you're driving a modern car, the modern cars have all the safety features that can control it better than you can with a manual transmission.
Okay, fine, but what happens if you go to Europe or some country where a manual is the prevalent car and you don't know how to drive it? How are you going to rent a car?
Well, a lot of those countries nowadays do have automatic transmissions, and if they don't, there's probably not places you're going to want to drive anyway. I think you want to take a bus.
Well, have you seen Jurassic Park? I mean, let's just say that you're being chased by a T-Rex, and all of a sudden you go into a garage to escape, and the only car in there is a Jeep, and it's a manual. You're going to get eaten by the T-Rex, Ronald.
Oh yeah, and you could also crash land on some magical island and mysteriously find a Volkswagen van that you have to drive across the island. Sure, all these things happen in TV movies. In real life, an automatic transmission is what you need to stay safe and get you from point A to point B.
So when I was growing up in Alaska, I learned how to drive a car on a stick shift, but I never intended to take my driver's test on a stick shift. And literally the day before I was supposed to take my driving test, my sister got in a car accident and wrecked my mom's car, which was an automatic, and that left me the stick shift. And to make matters worse, we grew up in Alaska, it was a blizzard, literally a blizzard. So I went to the DMV in a stick shift car in a blizzard to take my driving test. And I passed, but man, I tell you what, I was nervous. But once I knew I could do that in a blizzard and pass the test, I would drive a manual, at least until I couldn't get one any longer.
Well, funny enough, I learned to drive a stick shift by Ronnie, because my parents did not have a stick shift, and my car was an automatic. So Ronnie sneaked his dad's car out and then let me drive it. I'd still, to this day, I don't think your parents remember know that story.
You know, one of the things about manuals that I think most people don't realize is that there's nothing better than preventing car theft than buying a manual transmission. Think of the limited number of people that actually can steal your car if they wanted to. They'd have to know how to drive a manual. We should get lower insurance rates if you drive a manual. It makes perfect sense to me.
98% of cars that are made nowadays are automatic transmissions, and that includes the electric cars. They don't even have transmissions in them, and pretty soon it's going to be self-driving. There's going to be nothing to move around, and you can use your phone at that point, Ronnie.
You want to drive a car like this? You better learn how to drive a manual, because these come in stick.
Well, if you want to learn how to drive a bad boy like this, forget about the stick shift, learn how to drive an automatic.
So one of the things that I wish more people did is they taught their kids to drive a manual, because what is the thing that kids do most often when they're driving? They text. They get on their phone and they're using their text messages or they're fiddling with the radio. And if you have a manual transmission, you can't do that. You are engaged in the road, you are focused on the road. You do not have time to text or look at your phone or look at the radio stations.
Once again, Ronnie, there's an app for that. There's an app for preventing your kid's phone working while it's in the car, such that they can't be fiddling with it. I would love my kids to learn to drive a manual transmission, but because of other parts of the world. But the reality is that they're already thinking about self-driving cars and not needing to even drive themselves.
So I took a different approach with my kids, which basically I said, look, if you want to drive a car for mom and dad, or you even want to potentially get a car for mom or dad, it's a stick shift. And if you don't like that, go buy your own. That solved that. Both my kids know how to drive a stick shift now.
Look at it this way. I know you don't like horses, Ronnie. I mean, what, are you going to teach them how to ride the horse and buggy too and teach them how to ride horses? I mean, that's what you're talking about here. The manual transmission is the modern day horse and buggy. They're completely obsolete, the dinosaur of the automobile.
I won't disagree that they are a little bit not in favor, but that's purely because society is lazy. It's too hard to drive a manual. It's too much effort to drive a manual, and so we opt for an automatic for ease and simplicity. Riding a horse, driving a manual, not a good comparison at all.
I know, Ronnie, you drive the manual, get some extra exercise in, but there's video games for that too, Ronnie. Go to the old arcade. There's ones like that, or maybe have some like toy car with a little shifting mechanism so you can play around with it. It's really just a toy now. It's not meant to get you from point A to point B.
Look, I think you bring up interesting points, as always. I don't know that they're necessarily valid or related to what we're talking about, because if you talk about an arcade game, it's supposed to be a simulation of reality, and they are all stick shifts on the driving ones. If kids don't learn how to drive a stick shift in a game, why would they need to know that skill if they didn't intend to have them on the road with it, Ronald?
Well, you bring up a good point. Maybe we should talk to a real expert on this topic. How about we bring in Mr. Lewis, the driving instructor?
I think we should bring in an expert, because I think an expert will help reiterate and solidify my point, as always. Let's do that.
Mr. Lewis, what do you think? Should everybody learn how to drive a manual transmission?
Well, in the state of North Carolina, a manual shift is not going to be used to teach students due to the fact that it's difficult enough for them to learn on an automatic. But, once you learn how to drive, I think that learning to drive in manual shift is recommended, and it's okay, but it's not necessary to learn on it.
Do you think students that do learn how to drive a manual transmission end up becoming better drivers?
Better drivers? Not necessarily. The reason I think that it would be helpful in the area of just having fun is just fun to drive. But as far as having anything to improve on an automatic, I don't think it's going to improve anything.
What did I tell you, Ronnie? A stick shift is all about fun and games. It's not about safety. It's not about keeping kids off the phones. It's really all about a fun thing to drive.
I would like to call in another expert, please, because I feel like I was...
You can phone all the friends you want. It's not going to change the fact that a manual transmission is the dinosaur of the automobile.
I think we need to do a show on bribery, because I believe that's what just happened here, is Ronald had gotten together ahead of time to bribe to get his point across, which is really sad and pathetic, Ronald. But listen, I'd love to know, do you know how to drive a manual? Do you have a manual transmission car? We would love to hear about it.
Leave your comments down below. Let us know. I mean, is a manual transmission just like the horse and buggy or like the record player? Great novelty, but really not that functional in this day and age? We want to know. Leave those comments down below. I'm Ronald.
And I'm Ronnie.
And this is the Ron's World.